I think I'll start with this photo that I don't know if I've shown this to professors, but you guys can give it a read. And first give it a read and then I'll tell you where I found this. Now, I'm pretty sure all of us have felt with one of these things at least once in our Ashokan journey, or even in colleges or in our lives once. And I'll tell you where I found this note. So I was browsing, I was just in the library, like going through books that's what I do when I can't study. And there was this book called the Feeling Good Handbook. It's basically a handbook on, exercises that you can perform when you're not feeling that well. When you're a bit sad, perhaps you're overthinking, just exercises you can do, breathing, reflecting, the why ladder, those kind of things. And I'm guessing that a student issued this book, and this is they did this exercise. The exercise was probably, how do you feel? And the student wrote down, I feel helpless. And it was about, why they feel that way. So I feel helpless. Why? Because I feel afraid. Why? Because I feel extreme sadness. So on it goes. And I think I'd like you guys to focus on the top part, which says, I am scared. Why? Debayan's notes. So I don't know if you know Debayan, he's a CS professor. And apparently the student seems to be quite anxious about Debayan's note. Now, I may be reading into this too much. Of course, there are other aspects to our lives other than academics, but certainly academics does cause us anxiety, does give us anxiety, whether that be our grades, whether that be graduate school, whether that be building a good research application, etc. Exactly, placements. And as you can see, I have not really thought out this audio issue quite well. But I'm gonna smile and pretend that didn't happen. So yeah, we have that image, and that's the note that I like to start the panel on. So so of course you guys know Professor Rama and Professor Bittu. They are professors in the biology department, and both of them have been at Ashoka for quite some time. And I think if you look at any professor at Ashoka, their profiles is what we see first. At least that's what I saw when I was applying to Ashoka. That's what my parents asked me about, how the professors. And so our professors are very, very qualified people. And whenever we go to their classes, at least when I do, I feel like, these guys are at the top of their field. How can I ever be that good? Or when I'm not as fast enough as my peers, I feel like I'm not good enough for my math degree. I'm a math CS major. So these kind of questions all of us wrestle with. And this is why I wanted to start off with this note, because I think this is something all of us would relate to. And I'm doing this in collaboration with Vix, speaking of which. And if we want to design better academic cultures tomorrow, we have to start talking about that today. So hopefully when you guys leave this talk, you will be a bit more empathetic towards your friends, towards other people, and most importantly, towards yourself. And it's okay to struggle. It's okay to get an F, D plus. It's okay to not get into top graduate school. At least you feel a little bit better about it. And so I think I'm going to start with 3 questions. And professors, could you briefly talk about a moment during your UG years when you felt perhaps, uncertain about your academic abilities? Perhaps you felt, out of place academically, whether your peers being better than you, or perhaps your colleagues publishing in more prestigious journals than you. This could be during your UG, postgraduate, during current times, perhaps, now that you have established researchers. So we'll start with Professor Rama.
First of all, thanks for sharing that note. I think it's a great start to the panel. And I must admit that, and I hope this helps. Okay, it's not how do I say this? I don't want anybody to kind of, I don't know, how you take it is up to you, but the intent in sharing is that it's okay, right? And to answer your question, I have felt, I think, apart from Debayan's notes, I've never taken this class, but apart from that, everything listed there, I have felt during my UG, my master's, escalated in my PhD, escalated in the beginning years of my postdoc, right? And then I kind of, I think I just grew into my role, or I stopped caring, and caring meaning caring about what other people think. I think that was a huge thing. So yes, I have felt it. And I won't say that it's in the past tense. Even today, I continue to feel it. but I don't feel so. It doesn't stop me. You know what I'm saying? And it isn't out of proportion. Okay, I know how to handle it now. And specific incident, specific situations. So I was part of a lab during my. So one thing is during PhD there was no conversation, and it was there was nobody telling me that it's okay to ask questions, or look, this is how you analyze things, or there was no conversation about it. Nobody. None of my mentors said, why don't you ask questions? Do you feel hesitation? It's okay, you can email, or this is why you ask questions, right? So there it was a very anxious time. I equated asking, and during lab meetings and all, I equated asking questions with being smart, right? So I would just be very, just literally frozen. It took me a long while to understand that asking questions was for me, for me to understand, and it's a equal, that space was not there. Slowly in postdoc, I learned there, where also initially there was some anxiety because very smart people in the room asking very nice questions, but I learned the healthiness of it there. I don't know, just by talking to colleagues. And, if I ask them a question later, I learned to ask them questions in private and so on. But yes, I mean, like I think first couple of years during all through 5 years of my PhD, and first couple of years during during my postdoc, every lab meeting. So every Wednesday, you can imagine, 11 o'clock onwards, has to be like frozen and not asking questions. Right. But yes. Hopefully that's answered the question.
Professor, I would be alone in this audience and I still want you to speak. You speak really well. Anyways, Professor Bittu.
Okay, so I mean, I can answer. You asked a question about now, and then I would have a very different answer if I were to talk about my PhD experience also. I think left to myself, I'm a relatively shameless person. That's to say, shame and sort of I'm not doing as well as others and that kind of thing is not. It's a thought process I really dislike. It happens, right? And people often sometimes put it upon you, right? They'll say, look at everybody else, look at, and so when people do that impositionally, whether it starts from school, right? And then in fact, it happens less later, but in one's early years, comparison is a major way by which people think, educators, parents think it's a good idea to incentivize kids by saying, look at everybody else, which I think is a terrible thing to do. So I think wherever I was made to feel that way, I sort of it would successfully make me feel bad, and I would think I don't want to feel this way, and so I think I sort of moved in the direction of deciding that I wanted to kind of have as little influence of that kind of thinking on me as possible. I feel like as a very young student, that stood me in good stead. So I was not worrying too much about kind of how well I was doing in the kind of ratta-marrowing kind of realm of, is one coming first or second or third or fourth, or, all of that kind of jockeying discourse in class, who topped this quiz, that kind of thing. I largely kind of distanced myself from it. But that opened up the space in which I would read out of interest and do all of these things. And these were the things that ended up making me stand out as an applicant to graduate school. So for me, part of what stood me in good stead in the first place was this thing of kind of tuning out that kind of noise and just focusing on what I enjoyed and so on. Then I went to graduate school, which was in the US. And I realized also partly how my ability to have this mindset was very privilege contingent in the first place. Because in the US, I realized that I was being seen very differently from how I was seen here, right? Here I was seen as somebody with caste and class privilege, and even though not cis male, but still broadly speaking, not expected to crash and burn. I also like to sometimes point out the different ways in which patriarchy works here versus the US. Here, patriarchy doesn't work under the assumption that girls have to demonstrate that they are, intellectually inadequate. In fact, they're supposed to study and do well. In fact, very often, Indian data is used to counter US SAT data to show that Indian data sets, Singaporean data sets to show that girls routinely outperform boys in schools. Right? So in fact, in India, the way patriarchy works is you're supposed to obey and demonstrate that you are capable of learning. And then when you are told to stop learning and start kind of performing various household duties, you're supposed to drop it and demonstrate the same kind of competency in running a household and just sort of demonstrate competence all through. But the feudal element is what directs where your labor will go, right? You're not supposed to sort of say, well, no, but I enjoyed that and I'm going to keep doing it. But in the context of the US, patriarchy works very differently. Their patriarchy works in a way that people would like women to self-select out of the sciences, but have choice. So then choice is constructed in this way of if you self-select away from masculinity, you will be desirable, not even desirable like romantically desirable, but you will be a desirable human being for people to have a conversation with. And so there, I think, part of the reason that boys outperform girls in STEM in schools, which they don't in parts of the world like this, is because there's intense pressure on girls to underperform in order to assert that they are worthy of conversation and worthy of social inclusion and so on and so forth. In that context, the combination of that gender dynamic plus being viewed as a racial minority, I had a lot of Spanish-speaking friends. So, in fact, a lot of people assume that I was also Latino because there's also a difference in how Indians and Latinos are viewed in the context of the US. All of these intersecting dynamics often made me realize that I was for the first time in my life in a space where people expected me to not do well. And it was conveyed in various subtle ways. But just the fact that the expectation had shifted, because there I was sort of a queer, person of color, queer trans person of color, right? I was very much not expected to succeed in the way that other people there were. That shift induced an imposter syndrome in me of the kind that I was completely unprepared for at the time. And it also made me realize how powerful, experientially, not just in theory, how powerful it is when people expect you to not be the representative of academia. When you go to a space where you're not finding or seeing people like yourself in academia, right? You realize that this is the structural expectation of this space is, you can study here, but you cannot be a professor here, and so on. And of course, Harvard was also particularly toxic at the time. It was one of the last spaces to open up to women in the late 60s after many other universities had. It was one of the least racially diverse universities. It was the only university at the time that had not even contemplated having a president who was a woman, all of which mercifully changed. And I mean, I can talk about Larry Summers, who's now plentifully named in the Epstein files and his role in that whole thing at the time. But so Harvard was also a particularly toxic place, right? And women faculty were routinely kind of described by students. There were only a couple of tenured women faculty in a biology department, right, at the time. The way in which they were described and the words that were used informally to describe, to this day, women faculty who expect high productivity out of their students versus male faculty who do it. When male faculty expect their students to be hyper productive, they are considered, good motivators. And when women faculty have exactly the same expectations, they are, called slave drivers and taskmasters and so on, which is, bossy. Or bossy, right? And bitchy, right? This was the word that this is the specific word that I have heard used about women faculty so much in the US in a way that would not happen in this context, just out of the general kind of respect for teachers thing, right? Relatively speaking. So to hear words like that as a young grad student about women faculty routinely from other students, these are things that I think really shape the environment. So I think that I had classic imposter syndrome, which is strongly associated with how much of a minority you are in established fields of academia and how you are viewed in that system. I had a solid imposter syndrome where I really thought I shouldn't be here. I faked my way to whatever, getting into this space, but clearly this is not what is expected of me going forward. I have no idea how I got in, all of these things. I now see it retrospectively very, very differently. As I realize how all the cis men who were in my batch, etc., were made to feel similarly, and all of the various toxic dynamics that led to all of them experiencing crippling stuff that got, fears that got in the way of their work. So I now understand it very differently from then, but I certainly experienced it very solidly then. And I think that experience also made me revert to realizing that I had stopped enjoying science and that I was unhappy and that I wanted to leave the US and right after my PhD as soon as possible. And then I started again doing things which were along the lines of kind of, don't listen to everybody else, do what you feel like doing. And so unusually, I left a PhD in the US, didn't postdoc in the US, came back to India, postdoced here in the Indian Institute of Science, right? Very unusual career move, right? As you know, because I was not thinking of it as a career at all. I said, until grad school, right, I was doing the thing that one's supposed to do. I'd gotten into all these grad schools. It was seen as a successful kind of thing. And then the place that I landed up in was a place that didn't treat me particularly well. I mean, I'm glad I got a position there. I got a scholarship there. I'm glad for all of that. But it was structurally an institution that produced imposter syndrome in many people, and especially in women, in queer and trans people, in people of color. And I think many of us identify as survivors of that environment. And then after that, I haven't looked back. I've gone cascadingly down and up in institutions of varying repute. When I first came to Ashoka, I had no idea that Ashoka would become, was even aiming at the kind of success story it posits itself to be today. At the time, when I first visited Ashoka, it was in response to students asking me to give a talk. And I thought, oh, how cute, a small college in Haryana. I will go and check it out. And then I got recruited here. So, I mean, after that, I've really not been doing career moves or thinking of what I should do. It's just going with whatever felt like something enjoyable at the time. And that served me well.
One thing I genuinely believe,
yeah,
like whenever something bad happens in my life, I'm like, God is a comedian. So on that note, do you think it's kind of sadistic that Ashoka is called Haryanvi Harvard?
Yeah, I know. It's been quite funny to hear that. So I will say that, for many years here and in other places, especially with these sort of, opposite direction career moves, right? After ISC, I went to the University of Hyderabad. Right, these were all places where one had to kind of, for many years, kind of function without resources. I mean, I functioned in the University of Hyderabad out of my friend Jovi's, my colleague and friend Jovi's lab. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have had a physical space to even sit, right? So, working with these institutions and also all of the, all of the ways in which I,
The projector is
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's okay.
So, all of these impact productivity, and there's, by choice, I would say I have been much less productive than most scientists my age, shall we say. And, I've always been okay with that. Because, I mean, I would say that if I was worrying about that now, I would have plenty of cause for worry. But also you have these sort of very strange nonlinear dynamics in which, for 5 or 6 years, you're trying various things and they're not working. And, some people, sort of are regularly publishing all through. And if one does the comparison thing, or if one's made to see it, then, it propels you through these moments of kind of thinking of, clearly, I'm not doing things the way that I'm not able to make things work in the way that other people are. But especially as someone with ADHD, I have to say that I would not have survived academia if I was internalizing a lot of the shame that has been directed my way, right? Being an ADHD faculty member means you're often chaotic. You are, you're disorganized. You're working on 20 things at a time instead of one thing at a time. You're starting many projects, but not finishing them. And so, especially with many of those things, now I'm in the sudden sort of nonlinear dynamic of kind of several years of things not quite working out, trying many different things. And then suddenly all of them are starting to converge. And so now you have this kind of sudden kind of flourishing of the number of papers that you have, which surprises me as much as possibly anybody else. So it's just to say that, especially if you're neurodivergent in academia, and many of us are, right? Our trajectories are all going to look different from one another. And when you internalize a lot of the shame, it just cripples you, right? It really gets in your way. It reduces, all it does is reduce one's output. So I think the advice that I often give to students is think of why you like academia and nourish that like a candle in the wind, right? And if the wind is getting at you to the point, so often people think that if I beat myself up and it makes me work, that's a good system. So I should let myself feel a little bit of the shame, and I should let myself feel a little bit of it. It will help. It'll help get this done. Or I have a deadline. I want to meet the deadline because I don't want someone else to think badly of me. So I will work towards it. These are all short-term strategies, but if they start to demotivate you and they're getting away at that, then I think one should just junk them. And it's only when you sort of remember why you love something that it sort of organically moves in the direction that of productivity, broadly speaking.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson that most of us will get 15 years from now. Because I know I'm hosting this, but even I don't get it as of now.
Yeah.
In the sense there is an element of, I have to give this assignment because I have to get a certain grade.
Right.
Even though I'm into the material,
Right.
I have to make that negotiation. So, yeah.
Can I just add? See, one thing is, I agree with that. It helps to be shameless, so to speak, and it took me a long time to learn that. So you can see two very different personalities. So I was very internalizing all this. Nobody shamed me. Nobody. I used to top in class. I used to be the first person to be very surprised that I topped in class. If I was studying hard, my family would be very worried. And it was not the kind of, despite having traditional roles, it wasn't the kind of household where women are told to learn to cook. And I didn't cook till I was like in my 30s. And that was out of choice, partly out of need, but out of choice. I decided it's a survival skill. So, so the thing is that shame thing it was all me, just peer pressure. And it didn't really happen until college. And then it didn't start building up. I didn't choose the right places, I feel, and not for the right reasons. But all this is in retrospect. I learned a lot, and it is, who I am today. And I'm actually grateful for those, even the negative experiences, because they shaped how I interact with students and how I think. So, see, a very simple thing, for instance, you asked me about lab meetings. So there was one faculty member when I was presenting lab meeting. Now, obviously, this is back in the day when internet access wasn't so, and I'm also the kind of learner I'm a very spoon feeding type of learner. I learn from talking to people. Rather than digging and being smart and observing, I learn from, if I just ask Bittu, what do you think of my presentation? Were the slides okay? And then Bittu say something very specific, fonts and all. That's how I learn. But I didn't have that space there, right? So I'll tell you one, like just a body language thing. I had a PI, a research advisor, who would sit, if I was presenting, they would sit like this. Okay. Now that, if I used to see that
Slouched and with head in the hands,
just, and he is just not very professional, not very nice. Whatever it is, I'm standing there, I'm taking the time to present to you. And if you have a problem, you lay it out right there. Okay, tell me that this is wrong. And I'm an adult, I'm not below you. I'm just so that really made me very aware. So now, at least in my students' presentations, I make sure my body language is, and I do have a conversation. It's not, mind you, I must admit, it's not that I haven't made somebody cry because of my comments, but I've felt worse. No, I'm admitting it. You can ask students. I don't want to be this hypocrite but it has been, how do I say not? But I've been like, look, this is the feedback, this is it. I haven't just gone and said this is bad, or just, I said, look, this is how we fix it. And I take responsibility, I say, look, this is how I did it. Hopefully, and the effort is there. So anyway, I'm happy for those negative experiences. Anyway, I think I digress from what you were saying. One is the shame thing. Shame meaning don't care about what others think or what others are doing. Everybody wants to go to Harvard. You see, if you're just find some, I think Bittu's thing was saying, found somebody where he's a good fit at the time. Good fit in Ashoka, good fit in Hyderabad University, good fit. You find what's a good fit for you, not based on what other people. The second thing is about assignments and things. It's not just the instructor perspective. It was also my perspective when I was, a student and so on. One thing is I did find some genuine joy in a well turned out assignment and giving it on time. Second, I realized that it was less pressure. Now it's the opposite. Now I get so pressured sometimes I just don't submit grants, and for whatever, I think I could be a better fit elsewhere or a different whatever, right? Separate issue.
Institutional.
But institution, not department wise or whatever. I'm saying that. It's just a matter of fit. See, but the thing is, no, you chose to go to college. It's a privilege to go to college. Really, it's a privilege. So with that privilege comes a little bit of responsibility. So turn in an assignment. Don't, and I know, actually, when you asked, are you surprised by the turnout? I'm happy with even 2 people in the audience because I know what your academic lives look like. You have to have, you have co-curricular stuff, you have life stuff, you have CV building stuff, and you have assignments, and you have exams, and you have. So I'm very happy even if one person turns up, I'm like, oh wow, this person made the time. Right. So with all that, there comes a responsibility. Don't aim for perfection and 100% an A. Certainly don't think about the grade. Your first thing it should be turn it in A, show up to class, turn it in time. That's it. Right. Beyond that, don't pressure yourself. It's okay, really. So that professionalism is what you learn in college. That is important. So I hope that helps. But so just yeah. Yeah, I don't compare. If I spend 5 more minutes on it, if I spend another day on it, I do things last minute and they turn out better. Don't do all that. It's not good for learning, for anything. I mean, that's it.
I want to add something about a course because you mentioned grades. I was a really avid bird watcher as a kid, and then I remember taking one course on birds. This is the first birds of North America, which is like a bunch of really small brown birds, all of which are really difficult to distinguish from each other. But apart from my general distaste for temperate birds compared to tropical birds, doing it for a course, it broke my birdwatching interest in a way that I was a very long time ago, but I haven't fully recovered. In the sense, I still love birdwatching. I take my kid birdwatching. I've done birdwatching once elsewhere, but I don't do it with the same like zeal as before. And likewise, when I was making choices about sort of should I study evolution versus neuroscience, or should I do a biochemistry undergrad degree versus zoology, there were various things there were points at which I made decisions of the following kind. Biochemistry will be taught in this way. Zoology will be taught in horrible ratta marring. I don't particularly like biochemistry. So perhaps if I to learn it and get it complete, like my whatever limit, but I still love zoology because I did not do an undergrad degree in zoology. If I had to ratta maro all of the things which I know, because I know them because I want to know them, it would have broken my interest in that field also, right? So there have been decisions I've made at various times. So at grad school in evolution or neuroscience, evolution is something I loved. I kind of wanted to protect it from grad school, and I'm glad I did, right? I did neuroscience in grad school. There is no question that my enthusiasm for it at the end of grad school was lower than my enthusiasm going in. So many educational systems will destroy your love for a subject or reduce it. And, some of that's just about the fit of the way the pedagogy works with you. It's not necessarily about somebody seeking to do this. But you, as I said, realize that the relationship between you and your interest in an academic field is a precious relationship. Nobody ever tells you to value that. Right? People tell you to value grades, they tell you to value performance, they tell you to value all kinds of things which can counteract that love. And it is like the love for a person. It is a love for something that should not be trivialized and should not be sacrificed because you think that various indices of performance are more important than your love for the field. Eventually, it's only your love for the field that will take you through academia if that's the field that if that's the course that you want, right? Focusing on imposter syndrome in academia, but in academia, the only thing that sees you through it long term is your love for it, and that's why we've moved away from various forms of punishment in academic settings, because the data on educational psychology clearly shows that if you punish somebody, not just physically, obviously, which we've moved away from, hopefully as an educational system, but even the kinds of punishments which many people think are still okay, such as putting down somebody when they say something, that a teacher thinks is the wrong way to think, or using ridicule, using shame, using humiliation in classrooms. Those kinds of things will very quickly get somebody to stop saying whatever they're saying prior to the punishment, right? People learn through punishment a specific task more quickly than they will learn through reward or through just the joy of learning. But then they start developing aversion for the field, for the classroom, for the educational institution, for the whole enterprise, right? And many of you will have subject-specific, almost every one of you will have subject-specific anxiety and aversion based on some bad experience with some teacher or the other, right? Everybody. So I would say nurture the love you have for fields and think of them as precious and think of them as, something that they are the priority. If grades, institutions, and incentive systems help, then you can let them work together. But once anything impinges on that, that's your red flag. That's your red flag for whatever that institution or that space is not being good for you and for your interest. So that's the thing I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, there's water there.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Can I ask a quick question?
I'll give all of you time for questions. So I think one theme that I really want to talk about is comparison. That I'm pretty sure all of us have done this at some point. But looking at your peers, perhaps then or now perhaps colleagues would be the more appropriate term. Did you ever feel behind or outpaced during your PhD, during a postdoc? Right now, you mentioned that grant writing, there's a lot of pressure that's involved in grant writing. So looking at your peers, did you have, this anxiety about feeling behind?
Yeah, so I continue to, but I deal with it. See, one thing I've realized, and it took me many, 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 many years to realize that. And it took me that much time, but also I'm glad I realized there was somebody, I think my family was very important in reinforcing that why you comparing yourself and that kind of thing. So the successful people in my family or near and dear ones I've seen who are happy with their jobs. It's not about what they want to be, but it's about what they want to be doing. Okay, so that distinction I think I didn't make for a long time. And yes, comparisons happen every day, and it's very. It's part of the system. It's like part of the tenure system, right? So when we talk to each other, also I can almost see a question mark on somebody's head saying, oh, am I getting tenure or not? Is she getting tenure or not? Is her paper out? How many papers? So that comparison thing is there. But at the end of the day, I realize that I don't want to think of it in terms of do I want to be a scientist and full tenured professor? It's what I want to be doing on a daily basis. I've realized that I really like teaching. I like the kind of teaching I'm doing now. I like the students that I'm very fortunate enough to get. I like certain things about the science. I don't like dealing with the issues like, I don't know, ye instrument, following up, all the non-science stuff.
Logistical stuff.
Right? It's not even logistical. It is stuff that I'm not supposed to be doing. Right? So I remember having a conversation with a friend from PhD, and both of us, and said, so she was like, Rama, when we were doing PhD, I used to think being a scientist means sitting and reflecting and writing nice ideas and new ideas and reading a lot of books and just having the space to do that. And then both of us burst out laughing. It had been, I don't know, months since either of us had really sat and just even read a paper. So anyway, so now I realize it's more about doing rather than being something. And yes, comparisons are thrown at you, whether or not you want. You sit for a coffee with somebody, these conversations pop up. Midterm submit kar diya, or I'm organizing this conference or what have you. So the minute someone says, I'm like, oh, is it part of my CV? Is it that kind of thing? Okay, these things crop up. You have to, like Bittu said, you have to protect that. First, you have to identify. First, you have to know yourself. You have to identify what it is that you want. And it's not true just of academia. It's for anything, right? Have these short-term goals, have these long-term goals. See, my goals are always not, they were, okay, financial independence. And then I realized I needed some emotional independence. Also, I should, not, so that kind of thing. Emotional independence is I can't take all this work stuff and dump it on my family with them having, I should be, able to handle things and support them and things like that. Have goals like that also. It doesn't matter how you achieve them, right? But first identify those goals, right? And again, it should be more about what you want to be doing. Okay, so anyway, yeah, that's my take. But to answer your question in brief, yes, I still face it. I faced it then. It's just I know how to handle it now. And like Bittu said, I don't know, somewhere when I was, I think, maybe 10 years back, 12, 15 years back, I also became shameless. It increased in degrees, but on a fine morning, I'm like, yeah, correct.
So even now you have those, like amongst my peers at least, or amongst all of us, the conversation is usually, oh, acha, how much did you get in that test? Or what are your plans for the summer? And then the person says, I'm doing this internship at X or at X college. So automatically comparison. And I'm not saying people do this with the malicious intent to make other people feel less.
It is in your head.
But that's what our conversations are. Yeah, exactly. So what you're telling me is that this still happens, although now the talk isn't about internships. So it's about what conference you organize, what paper you're working on, what journal you got published in.
Yeah.
What you're
Who is talking to whom, who is, that kind of thing. It's very, sometimes it's over.
Who
People
gets invited
do it
to
in
which conference?
yeah. Or who gets, or it's also what talk, who's part of what, all those things. But I've also, and sometimes people do these deliberately. Okay, I'll give you a very funny example. Okay, now this is really irrelevant. How people kind of, and maybe it's perception also. So now I've learned to just kind of see things only on the surface. So once I made some bread, okay, and this great wish to be an expert at bread making, and still not realize but there's hope. I made some bread and I had to, I gave it to somebody. And they're like, you don't have a big lab and you're not, you don't have any, whatever. They just measured the fact that I was making bread. They related that to their perceived, lack of the big group I had or big grants or something like that. And that day I was like so down. And I'm like, what the hell? What is this? I enjoy making bread. I'll make it.
With your so you were making bread.
No, I made bread. This person is like, oh, you have the time to make bread. Instead of because you don't, it was hilarious. Like, how do you connect that? How do you do that? Like, I'm sorry, I wasn't very clear. But so then I was like, oh my God, I should be, I should not, I should just be, very pressured, very okay, big deal. It's one of the things I like. It's science. Whatever. So this is how people, and they said it in front of somebody who, somebody like kind of, like somebody very senior, and then anyway. But then that's it's how you take it. What? Yes, and then I didn't respond. I just laughed it off. But then for me, it takes me. Then it didn't feel good. But then, like I said, so this happens, but I learned to handle it now. I'm like, it takes a while sometimes because it catches you by surprise. But it happens, but you should know how to handle it. The one thing is, really, again, I'm stressing on what you have to find what gives you joy at the end of the day. It's only you, nobody else can. That's it.
So do you have something?
I mean, I've spoken a bit about comparison and not getting in, but there's one thing that I always want to tell students, and that is often I get this sense of anxiety from all of you of sort of, I need to build my CV and it needs to have certain components in it. And you're now undergrad school. If you're going to stay in academia, you are going to grad school. And in grad school, they're not looking for, have you done 10 extracurriculars? Have you worked in 6 different labs or anything? No. They're looking for whether you're going to do the kind of thing you'll do in grad school, which is essentially sit with a problem for a long time, chew on it, get to understand it really well. Because you're moving in life towards times when you're self-motivated and you need to start. That's what they're looking for. So in fact,
there are some scholarships that specifically do for how do you, I mean,
correct. There are some.
So we shouldn't give them that impression that.
But I mean, just grad school admission, right? So admission to grad school, right? Many of those fellowships are also not for graduate school. Some of them are.
Yeah.
But some of those are interdisciplinary. So they'll ask you to look for various things. So I would say that, don't feel like you have to, demonstrate varied interests or demonstrate, a variety of experiences, right? You have to demonstrate that you will enjoy doing what you enjoy doing. So enjoy doing, start with that right away, right? At least for me, when I'm taking students, I don't look at grades. I don't even look at grades when I take students into my lab, right? I look at enthusiasm, right? And does this person really sort of seem to want to do this? Do they really kind of enjoy it? And and then ideally you actually work with them to see whether that's just kind of a stated enthusiasm, or do they, because grad school, as I like to say, is the place where you transition from watching movies to making a movie. And they're two very different processes. You may like reading about science, but you may not want to be the one doing the science. You may like watching 20 movies, but only one of them may make you think, I could make that movie, and I would make it in this way, in that way, and so on. So as you said, it has to be also trying the doing of science, not just, do I enjoy sitting in a class where I'm being entertained by this kind of academic, these ideas. So those are some of the pieces of advice that I just want to convey moving forward. And yes, at every stage one can compare. But as I said, for example, with Protecting the Flame, one of the things you're supposed to do is to get grants. I've gotten grants. Sometimes I've not gotten grants I've wanted, but every grant that I've gotten, I'm grateful for them. But every grant that I've gotten has involved so much bureaucracy and paperwork that they have made me. They've competed with time for reading papers. They've competed with time for class prep. They have made my life miserable. And so in any case, I'm a believer in frugal science, and I try to do as much low budget science as possible, partly because that enables more people to do science with us in the lab. But also, the less one is, I still think that science funding should be stable and not involve these cycles of like getting money, spending, I mean, obviously, there are advantages to getting a grant. You need it sometimes to advance a new line of work in the lab and so on. But I'm not a fan of the model where grant writing and grant management takes up such a chunk of academic time. In fact, there are parts of, I wish I could just go like postdoc in somebody's lab and just do science without having to do any of the management. And the managerial aspect of things is, I think, just, I don't know of any scientist who enjoys it. It's just like something we intensely dislike.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So clearly academia is not perfect. And although that's a theme I really want to talk about more, I will stick to another question that I have. I think there are a lot of, you guys talk about grant writing, right? One of the aspects, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, know much about this, but as far as I've read and watched interviews, grant writing involves telling the person, okay, this is the field that I want a grant for, and this is what I expect out of the research. This is what you can.
Yes.
This is basically your return on investment, ROI,
Right.
that you would get if you fund my research. So there's this expectation. If I give Prof Bittu or Prof Rama this grant, this is what I'll get. Right. Perhaps it'll be more money. Perhaps it'll be patenting rights, but something you'll get. So there's that expectation. So on that note, could you talk about how I'm free feel to digress if this question doesn't resonate, but how did external expectations perhaps shape your decisions, and not just your decisions during UG or PhD, but even now, like how when you're trying to decide, what field I should work in, or what keeps you going to research, or what keeps you researching into the field that you're pursuing right now. Are there any external expectations, perhaps from grant committees, perhaps institutional expectations, perhaps societal? I'm not too sure. But is that something you guys can talk about?
Want me to go first? Yeah. External expectations in terms of grants.
Any
I'll
time,
tell you,
actually, that was just an example.
Any time of life, external factors that impacted my choices were a little bit of I'm a Delhi girl. So then I picked a college close by because I didn't want to be traveling in buses late at night, and safety issues. And the thing is, I was very I don't know how to, very immature, as in I thought this is how it is. This is how the world is. I'm a woman and I should be safe, and that kind of thing. There's no, what I'm saying. That's how I grew up. You go in a bus late, middle class family, and then you have all these Eve teasers, stupid euphemism for horrible males. But so that kind of just impacted my choice of PI. So I picked a female PI. It was not a good match for my PhD, and that kind of stuff, right? But as such, choices in biology and what I wanted to do it was more exploratory and that kind of thing. Okay, it wasn't very, I wasn't very clear. Like unlike Bittu, I was very clear. I just liked experiments. I like doing science. I like bench work. So I decided I have to do a PhD because I want to spend time in the lab and stuff like that. Right.
I chose this lab work.
Lab work, yeah, wet lab work,
Oh, right.
like wet lab work. Nothing computational, but I like doing stuff, figuring out stuff, and just doing lots of experiments. Um, so factors, not expectations. Expectations now, yes, they shape. So my grant writing, I have given up on ideas, which is my own fault, okay, because of certain things. So for instance, the thing I wanted to work on was cervical cancer. I took down my website, it used to be on my website, cervical cancer. And my logic was scientific curiosity also and opportunity also, because we don't have the HPV vaccine in India, which prevents cervical cancer. And I thought, okay, here's a space where, if you get a good collaboration, you can study T cells, and that's my cells of interest in cervical cancer and so on. Right. And a very senior person I was talking to them, they said that, one thing is, okay, they wanted me to write something on head and neck cancer because person I work head and neck cancer, also caused by HPV, but the human papilloma virus. Rama, not a disease by force. Come back. All right. So right. So they wanted to write me to write on a different cancer because they had a contact, and more importantly, because the person I did my postdoc with had published a couple of papers on it. So I just I was a little open. I said, no, that would be like derivative science. It's not my idea. It's it's in a lab I work. My colleague is, he is. So I don't want to do that. I want to work on cervical cancer. And whoever spoke to me about this, one, they didn't like the idea that I said it's derivative science, which means they're just copying somebody else's idea. And the second thing they said is, oh, you're so slow and cervical cancer, the reviewers are just going to think it impacts half of India. Why should they care? It impacts only women. Why should they care? And that was then I just left it. So it impacted the fact I never wrote that grant. I never wrote it because that whole conversation was, I gave up on it. So yes, it impacts. So now it's about what will be funded, what I can do, and what I like doing. So often I do compromise on what I exactly like doing, but there's only so much I'll compromise on that, not, but it impacts what is being funded, what the grant proposal is, where do I have a track record, and it does impact.
Right, just about follow-ups. When they said slow, did they mean as in you publish slower than other researchers? Is that what they mean?
Yeah, slow or
Very
and the
slow.
thing is, my kind of research is like that. I'm also I think, very thoughtful. I at least like Bittu said, it's the same thing, same attitude. I'd rather get something out that's thorough. It doesn't have to be something very unique or anything, but that's thorough. It's well done, it's thorough, and it's a quality more than quantity. So yeah, that was I mean, it was also to do with returning sending them some one pager, similar to what my previous PI had already done and things like that.
Because that's more established.
What
your previous PI did? Was that the reasoning they said? This
they didn't say that explicitly, but that paper, I mean, what he was asking you to do was basically the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I see.
And the logic behind that was flawed. I tell you someday, it's a little bit of the logic behind that was flawed. But anyway, yeah. So it does shape. It does shape. But you know what? The mistake I made was not following through with what I had. And also, you have to, in order to stand. Now, again, the mistake I made there was just mentioning that idea to him before I had completely done in-depth research and really stood by it, because that's a good thing to do. That stands by it, right? So you have to have read every paper on it, or done your research. And I'm sorry, it doesn't apply just to academics. Anything. If you want to go to a certain school and whoever your caregivers are, whoever's funding, they say why, you have to have done your homework. This is why. This is how I'll save money. This is how it's to your advantage. You have to have done. I hadn't done my homework. So,
I see. First, do you have?
I mean, expectations, I think, always impact you, and then so There are expectations that we should do medically useful science, I think, which are constant. Yeah. So for anyone in kind of more blue sky kind of research in evolution,
What is
or
that? Please tell us.
so blue sky is this idea of sort of, I find an idea interesting in science. It's not necessarily immediately useful, or I can't think. I mean, I can think of ways in which it could be useful down the line, but it's not sort of immediately kind of application oriented. But then, understanding the way the world works better
Fundamental.
leads to new avenues of, which eventually kind of converge on application. Of course, I have several examples of stories where blue sky research kind of unexpectedly leads to huge paradigm shifts in standard medical kind of science. But those kinds, there's that kind of expectation, I think, is high in say biology departments, and in every field there are expectations of what you should work on, what's a respectable problem to work on, and so on. And often that's the more derivative your work is, right? The more it's respectable because someone else is also working on it. It's in a field where you have colleagues who will cite you, you will cite them. So often you are strongly rewarded for even grants. You will get a grant if you continue doing what you've done before. But if you try something new, the chance that you'll even be given a grant are relatively low. So I think there are various expectations that hugely shape what we end up doing research-wise, which is, expectation of continuity, expectation of expertise, expectation of staying within a field where there are other people who can review your work, and so not straying too far from the pack, and so on. And all of these, I think, do limit science. Of course, you can also have work that sort of goes off the rails, where someone's producing work that can't be reviewed by anyone else who's near them, and therefore it effectively is not peer reviewed. So there's of course some balance between these various approaches. But this is to just say, yes, a lot of it is strongly built around expectations. I mean, we're learning what we are taught. Everything is curated based on expectation, right? In fact, the only aspect of our learning and our research that is us and not just about the world, arguably is sort of the feeling that some branch of academia gives you. That in turn is something that can change because you've had a good experience or a bad experience in that academic field. But perhaps most of what we do is stuff that we have already learned from others in the past. In that sense, social expectations, academic expectations have already shaped what you think of as the framework within questions can be asked. So we should never underestimate how much expectations shape us, and not just how much expectations shape us, but how expectations are encoded in the material that we're taught in the first place. We build in academia upon a database of things that we have been taught before that, or on a sequence of methods that we've been taught, all of which delimit and shape the constraints within which we think we have to think further, right? So it's one can't ever pretend that one is free of expectations and so on. Yeah.
I'll open the audience up to questions just after this very small follow-up. You said that there are expectations built into the very material that we read from.
Yeah.
Will you think of something in specific when you said that?
No, I'm saying that typically when a textbook is written or a course is curated, right? We also curate courses. There is such a thing as, we say, this is what we expect of students in the course, right? And that's at least, I'm glad that we at least explicitly write that out in our syllabi. But even when it's not written out, there's always expectation built into a course. It's sort of, I expect to present the material in this way and for you to understand material in this way. And it has a huge impression upon whoever's being taught, certainly, right? So, and of course, as learners, I mean, we are all doing this based on what we've been taught. And so, one can argue that there's very little original in terms of what we do anyway, right? But or incrementally, small sort of bits of originality can kind of enter the way in which we decide what to do next. And of course, in research, you are trying to do work that has not been done before, in some sense. But much of it is already, based on the ways in which people have determined for you what they will teach you, the number of stories we don't learn for various reasons. And we have good examples of amazing stories that we don't learn. So for example, digitization has caused that. So things that have gotten into, so there are many journals have papers that are 40, 50 years old that have not been digitized. They're not even in the searchable database. for many of you who've never read classic papers which are in print, these are ideas that are just lost, right? Essentially, to most people, they're made illegible to most people. But this is just to point out that, like, many things that you think of as not, you think of yourself as having access to the world of scientific knowledge so far, not at all. Most material which is not in English, right, which has emerged as this colonially dominant language, is out, right? Of course, there have been historical libraries and databases and so on that have been built up and destroyed, as governments, by changes of government, by displacement, by war, all kinds of things. So this is just to say, we're not sort of, we're never seeing kind of an objective and consolidated body of information, in education. You're always seeing something that is curated, and it's curated with expectation.
Mm-hmm. That's I think I'm going to stop with the follow-ups. I'm sorry. I'll open up questions to audience, so I'm thinking about more questions. But do you guys have, I think you had a question, Rish. But if you guys have questions, then please just raise your hand or tell your friend and they can answer if you're a bit shy. Any questions, guys? Yeah, you can add.
The thing is, I don't know how much it works, but see, when you ask questions, just this is a space where you should feel free to comment a question, right? So one thing I always say in class is, please be wrong. It justifies my position here. If you're wrong, I can say, okay. And there's no such thing as, completely wrong, or you can just show me your reasoning, right? At least in this space, feel free to ask the question. I'm not sure we have all the answers, but we can share our experience. Oh, yeah, we have a question. Yeah.
So do you think in any way expectations that you've had from anyone, they've actually helped you in any way, in the sense that, like, an expectation that maybe your peer had, that, oh, I expect you to do X thing, and you did it just out of expectation from that person, and it genuinely helped you in some other way or in the same way that they expected it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I think the most useful expectations are when somebody hopes for you to do something that you thought you couldn't, right? I think it's not so useful when someone says, I expect you to do this thing that everybody else is doing. But I think it's useful when somebody says, well, you thought this is out of reach, like you should go for it. And one example is, earlier in Ashoka, even in the biology department, we were having difficulty finding applications from women. And, when one's looking at gender compositions in STEM departments, it turns out that just the pool of applicants, forget about selection, right, gets skewed in terms of gender. And I'm sure also in terms of caste and race and so on, the gender has been better studied with respect to this. When the department advertises itself as, excellent, or a space of, so these are words that departments routinely will want to use for themselves, or institutions will want to use for themselves, right, as part of building themselves up as an attractive destination, right, for people. But they do have an asymmetric effect upon those who experience imposter syndrome, right? Which is basically, it signals to them, okay, this place thinks that it is setting a standard, and who knows what that standard is. So I should probably just not waste my time applying, right? And people differentially feel that. For example, I can't tell you the number of grants, especially there've been a lot of grants recently for senior distinguished faculty. And so you're like, I'm senior or distinguished. I mean, there's no point at which you reach the point where you're like, I have arrived, at senior distinguished kind of
don't.
Yeah, I
don't.
totally wouldn't. Yeah, but that's what
You
I'm
don't,
saying.
and I don't. That's it.
Exactly. But it's not just us. I think it is. I know some people do, but I think it depends on their location. It depends. I mean, it has a strong relationship with gender, caste, class, all of this stuff, I think. And I think most of the people I know who I would think feel that way are men. For some, they're upcast men. They are, no question.
Right. So clearly, our professors also disagree with each other, or are different.
As we should.
Yeah. So guys, please, don't be shy to say.
Disagreement is just,
different viewpoints.
Okay, just to not counter, but to how many people have you noticed?
Yeah.
Next time notice, okay?
Yeah.
who have introduced themselves as, "Hi, I'm Dr. Bittu. I'm Professor Bittu."
I know.
Right?
I'm trying to do the opposite thing of distinguished also.
I've seen both men and women.
Yeah.
I don't caste doesn't enter into my head somehow. I don't calculate, but I've seen both men and women do that. So that's why I'm saying, you know,
Like
it
put
comes
the
to
doctor before there.
they put the doctor, they put the professor. I've seen somebody introduce themselves before they talk. They introduce themselves with literally 10 minutes of "I was director of this,
Oh,
I was this, I was this, I was this, I was this," right? So that's what I'm
Yeah, I agree.
They feel they deserve it.
I've seen it.
Anyway,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay.
Lots of
Arijit,
questions.
Vasisht, anyone else? I think Ashish also had a question. Arijit, Vasisht, Ishan, and then Ashish. Or Ashish first. Ashish first. This was
Historical order.
I just the comment that Rama made about your advisor or PI was sick. It's a lot of unprofessionally. It's kind of disrespectful also, right? Doesn't make you feel good. One kind of coping strategy which I have personally felt sometimes during high school and maybe sometimes now also is that if somebody is disrespectful or doesn't take you seriously enough in a professional or a non-professional context, mostly professional, is one coping strategy that you kind of like decide I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to do so well that they will take me seriously. And do you think that's a healthy way to?
I don't know, whatever works for you. Okay, for me at that time, I was still, like I said, very immature. I didn't even know that, and that space wasn't provided. Although they said call us by our first names, you're equal. That space wasn't provided. So I just felt bad, and I took it on myself, saying I'm a bad presenter. I didn't do well. I'm not smart enough, so I deserve this treatment. Okay, but I don't know if it works for you, fine. That kind of thing doesn't work for me because then it takes away the joy and it has, like it's. I don't care. Well, you can sit however you want. I do what I find joy in. That's it. If, and unless you tell me why you're sitting like that or why you're so upset, I'm not. I don't know. Right. So it's on you. It's not on me. It can be healthy or it can be unhealthy. Depends. Can't be an obsession. And at the end of the day, if it makes you reach, like Bittu said, for something that you didn't think, and it increases your confidence, it gives you a goal, sure. But it shouldn't take away, you shouldn't lose focus about what you, for whatever it is, whatever your goal is, whatever your need is.
Vasisht.
I think Arijit want to go first.
Oh, right, sorry.
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Guys, please courtesy बाद में करना. कभी class है यहाँ पर.
Yeah, that's right. Go on.
Anyone of you guys can go.
Sure. So, professors, you talked about being a good fit in an institution. And I think I personally felt that, for the longest time, I felt that, okay, maybe you're not a good fit initially into a campus or anything of that sort. But how do you ensure that you try to make the best of the situation and ensure that you're making the most of the institution that you're part of? That's what.
Interesting question.
Perhaps some context would help.
Context, yes. Okay, give me a hypothetical.
I can answer with my sort of one-line reply to that, which is that, as I said, with academia and academic choices, I've stopped trying to make them in a kind of careerist way right after grad school. And for me now, the question of whether you're a good fit is a question of whether you're same as the question of whether you're a good fit with another person. It's like falling in love. There are spaces where you go and you like being there. You like the people you see around you. It's affirming. And so we're rarely taught in academia to listen to our emotions when we're engaging. And that's really vital. So it's like falling in love. When you feel good, when a place makes you feel good, then it's the right fit.
Actually, I would also break it down a little bit. Okay, because at least for me, I know that most places won't. I'll find. That's my personality. I'll nitpick everything. I look at flow cytometric plots for a life, which is a bunch of dots, and comparing them. So this dot, this could be a little bit, right? But so I'll see the top three things and if they work for me, and people are certainly part of it for me. People meaning it doesn't have to be hum saath hai, but there has to be a certain amount of professionalism, politeness, and just general kindness around. If that kind of thing is not there around me, then it's not, it impacts me at least. There are some people who are like, if you are a person who doesn't really like talking to people, then being in an environment may not force to do that. So you have to figure it out. And certain things is about location, resources, life. For instance, I really love Ashoka's library. I really like it. For me, that's very important, having a good library resource. I used to love the library where I was before and the space to go use that library and all. That kind of thing. So resources and yeah. Bottom line, what Bittu said, that should make you feel happy, but you should also have some sort of measurement, right? And your happiness can't go like this, right? You have to figure that out. I'm sorry, I hope that helps, but
Yeah.
make the most. But I would say, if say out of 30 days in a month, let's say half the days you're miserable, you don't want to get out of bed and face that institute, is not worth staying. We can talk after this. I don't want to keep talking, but context dependent or something, we can talk. Yeah, I think Arijit had a question, right? Yeah. You
Yeah.
have that. Sorry, I'm taking away.
No.
Yeah. So thank you both for sharing some wonderful insights and this talk. So first I had a comment about what Professor Bittu said about how female professors who are like too much of a taskmaster or expect a lot from their students are treated very differently from male professors, which was quite interesting. Personally, whatever the gender of the professor may be, I use some beautiful words whenever a professor gives too much work. But y'all are not among them, please don't worry. And second, I had a question. So similar to what she asked about expectations, where does comparison actually help? Because personally, when I was a kid, I'm an only child, but that didn't spare me from being compared to my cousins and all. But when I was a kid, my parents comparing me didn't make me feel sad. It made me angry. I would literally be like, "Ki, Arey bhaiya, aap bas karo. Why are you comparing me to them? Mom, dad, leave it alone, choro." And I'm your kid, right? Talk about me, how I can get better. But comparison also it also gives you a sense of what's happening around you in the field or in the world. So, like, where does it help, whether in academia or outside?
I don't know. Arijit, for me, comparing with other people or it doesn't help me be productive or be focused on my work or something. It doesn't help me, very simply, right? But of course, I have to do it if there are certain career-related requirements, or there are certain, how do I say, if I'm comparing with certain measures. Okay, you can do this job if you, okay, you can continue to teach this course if your evaluations are this much, right? So there I have to compare. But I can't compare myself with Bittu's evaluations or Anoop's evaluations and so on, right? So it doesn't help me. For me, it does nothing for me, honestly, because I know I could win 2 Nobel Prizes tomorrow, but I could win 1 Nobel Prize, but there's somebody who's won 2. So then I'll be sad about, it doesn't help me. I don't know if it helps somebody else. I don't see any scenario where comparison with other people is helpful. It doesn't. For me, it doesn't.
Okay, guys, we're kind of running out of time. And I think some of you have classes as well, 3 p.m. Ishan, if you could keep it quick and short.
Yeah, so Professor Bittu had an observation about spaces, and the really big issue that across all disciplines in Ashoka is a conversation about space, seeking classrooms, for example, and it's something that dominates a lot of our time. So when we're in these really claustrophobic spaces and are like really tense about finding a place to calm down and really work, how do we function around that? How do we innovate in these types of spaces, and how do we keep ourselves interested in what's a really claustrophobic space?
Oh, actually, it's a difficult question to answer. A lot of it depends on why the space is claustrophobic, what's happening. I've supported various students through experiencing that, and different things have worked for different students. Some students travel, some students work from home. These are the practical ways in which they deal. For some students, I've tried to find working arrangements that, the other thing about running a lab is that you're really sort of dealing with, so there was this thing about sort of professors giving work. In an ideal world, professors would never give work, and I try to never give work, right? I try to sort of really create a space where students can work on things they're interested in rather than to assign work, which I'm really opposed to. But when you do this, you're often also, students, especially in grad school, where no one's telling you what to do, are really hitting up against their own motivation. In that grad school is where you realize, maybe I want to make this movie, but I don't want to make it so much when things are so difficult. If things were easy, I would like to do this, but I don't want to do it. The kinds of difficulties in the field, I don't. So those are the kinds of things you can only figure out by doing them. And then when people hit up against the roof of their motivation and they find themselves losing motivation, or the space is claustrophobic, or the space has become claustrophobic because you're stuck in the room with your own failures of the last month. You've been trying something, it's not working. And every time you go there, you're reminded of it. So you don't feel like going back to the lab. These kinds of things are important to deal with in grad school. And so then I really try and sit with them and have a conversation, not about the work, but like, where are you stuck? What will make you feel better? What sounds like an appealing idea to you? What can we change? So sometimes it's involved saying, don't work out of this space, work out of that space. Or, you're not enjoying doing this in the lab. Why don't we try doing this as a semi-natural experiment? You'll be outdoors, it'll be a different kind of situation. Do you want to try it that way? Is there some particular aspect of this that we can change so that, it works for you? And for some people, some people want to work in isolation, right? The social interaction is difficult. So then you try and find a way that they can work in isolation, even within the constraints of everyone sharing a space. Some people want to work at night because that's when no one else is there. So often it's about the logistics, but it is about understanding all the reasons that one can feel claustrophobic. And sometimes it is just being in a space and having an unpleasant encounter with somebody else, and then that just creates an aversion for the space. So, and all of these things can happen with a small campus and with so those are all things too.
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah.
So the claustrophobia thing, it can be just facing those same things, same people, all that. One thing is, in academia or any that related space, going to meetings helps. And you guys going to even local meetings, doesn't have to be a meeting abroad. Local meetings, you'll find lots of support. And you're fortunate to be in Delhi, going to meetings, talking to PhD students, going to poster sessions, even on campus, talking to those students, it really helps. It at least for me, it really changes my perspective, makes me very enthusiastic. Oh, I'd forgotten I was interested in this. Oh, it's this, right? So that helps. I think it's that feeling of mental claustrophobia, so to speak, will change. You'll be talking to different people about your work. I think that will be very helpful. Physically, if you need a desk, I know, very, very small solution. If you need a desk to work in a different space, come talk to me. Have a spare desk. Yeah.
Okay, guys. Unfortunately, I cannot take any more questions, but I suppose that's it for this event. Thank you guys for coming. एक मिनट लगेगा. You guys come. Can you guys come आगे? Like here, over here. I will pause.